Good evening and welcome to those of you that have attended or turned up for our SBUK members meeting. I feel very, very honoured to have in our presence tonight Joe Giddings, a good friend, and one of our peers, I would say, one of the pioneers and one of the founders of the Architects Climate Action Network, of whom we have worked with on numerous occasions. He also at present is working for Built in Nature. Previously, he worked for ASBP, and tonight he will be giving us a talk on timber and insurance. It's one of the obstacles, if you like, that we have had to overcome, insurances anyway, when it comes to working with low carbon, and in our case straw. Many of our builder friends and contemporaries have often said to us that, look, it's very difficult to acquire insurance for their build, and their clients have been put off by this. So we need to navigate the paths to understand how we can go about ascertaining the right kind of processes to overcome that. And I'm hoping that Joe would be able to give us some ideas for us to overcome this. So what I'm going to do very briefly, for those of you who don't know who we are, is just go through and share my screen, and I'm going to go through who Straw Bale UK is. So we are Straw Bale UK, an outfit that is specializing in working with straw, not necessarily in the bale format. Some of our members work with MMC, which is called or stands for Modern Methods of Construction. And tonight, what we're going to do is speak about the joins, if you like, the connections between all of this. So where do we come into all of this? Straw Bale UK started around 2015, consisting of practitioners, designers, academics, and enthusiasts, as well as trainers. Some of you will know Barbara Jones. We also have within our group is Phil Christopher of Huff and Puff and Joe Hartwin. We also have other big names within the group, like Jeffrey Hart, otherwise known as the natural builder. I hope I've got that right. I very much think I've got it wrong. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, Eco Build. So what we've done over the years is really try to branch out, if you pardon the pun, to really promote working with straw. And we have attended events such as Eco Build, which is now known as Future Build, presenting within the natural materials arena, which is, and that particular event is based in London. Jeffrey Hart, as I mentioned to you earlier, was the lead for this particular event, the Big Straw Bale Gathering. And as the name says on the tin, it really brought together all of the names within the industry, some of whom came from Europe, to talk about working with straw. More recently, we have been working with our European partners on a project called Upstraw, funded by the European outfit called Interreg. This essentially consists of promoting straw to the public sector, and we've been doing that for a number of years. We finished last year, and our most recent projects within that whole ensemble, if you like, is the translation of the French standard or the French rules. We're very close to completing that, and you'll be seeing that on our website any day now. Last year, we hosted the ESBG, or online. We're part of other groups dealing with promoting again straw bale and straw buildings within Europe. So we had online events as well as visiting physical sites. And we also have contributed towards government policy. More recently, we've contributed written evidence around carbon emissions in the UK. And essentially, and I suppose far more relevant in terms of what's happening within the UK moving forward in terms of skills and trade, we have a number of people within our group who are teachers. And Kit Jones, who's one of our directors, teaches at the Centre for Alternative Technology. Andy, who is in on this call, you can see on the right-hand side, on that course, on the Sustainable Materials in the Built Environment course. Andy is a structural engineer, so it's really great to have somebody, and he, as well as others, who really go across the board when it comes to opening up their minds within the built environment. So I think we need to move on to the review of STEP. And with regards to this, just so you know, STEP is a European online course. We at Straw Bale UK have looked into this over the past few years, and we will be adopting this program. So watch out for this next year. We'll be developing and promoting and pushing this out to people in the UK. So it stands for Straw Bale Training for European Professionals. It's probably the only straw bale course that is adaptable enough and really is able to cross to be converted across Europe. So we're really happy and we're really keen to look forward to doing them. So join us. This is my last slide before we hand over to Joe. Join us, please, because we're an open group and we welcome anyone. So you don't necessarily have to be involved in building. If you're keen and you want to know more, then just look at our website and the signing up details are there. So without further ado, I'm going to close this now and hand over to Joe, who I'm hoping will be ready, he says, to take over. Joe.
Thank you very much, Cyprian. That was great actually to see an intro to Straw Bale. Thanks for sharing that. I'm just going to get my slides up. But it's really good to meet you all, and I'm very glad to be here. And yeah, I suppose me and Cyprian have been chatting for probably a couple of years now, just informally about well, I suppose what needs to happen for bio-based materials generally. And a lot of the work that I've been doing is focused on timber, but I think a lot of the lessons are applicable to other bio-based, other plant-based materials like straw. So I've been asked to just speak a bit about timber, the work that I've been doing on timber and insurance specifically, but I'll talk a little bit about both the opportunities and challenges of timber construction and why we're working on them through Built by Nature. I'll just give you an introduction to Built by Nature and give you an overview of the type of timber construction that we're aiming to increase. Some project examples as well, the types of timber buildings that are being built in the UK at the moment, and then I'll talk about some of the work that we're doing to help the industry overcome some of the major challenges to using timber. So Built by Nature is a charity. We're headquartered in the Netherlands, and we have an overarching vision, which is for the built environment to work in unison with nature. And what that means, or how that translates into the kind of work we do, to start with, we're focusing on accelerating the use of timber in construction. And in the UK, that's even more focused. We're looking at mass timber specifically, the kind of group of engineered wood products as we see that these have a huge potential for decarbonisation of the industry at the moment. But in the future, we will be shifting to a wider focus on bio-based materials generally. So whilst we're focusing on timber now, and that's our first focus, we recognize this is just one of many bio-based materials that all perform the same function really in terms of sequestering and storing carbon in our built environment. So we are a network and a grant fund. We hand out grants for bits of research and things like that, but this goes hand in hand with our network, and that's where I come in. So I'm the UK networks lead for Built by Nature. All of my colleagues are based in the Netherlands, but we have what we call local networks, as in national networks in the UK, Netherlands and Spain. And we're really trying to create a pan-European movement. And we work with a few different organizations at that kind of pan-European level. So we're trying to build a community of kind of partnered organizations. You can see these on screen at the moment. There's probably a couple that are worth pulling out, which are kind of relevant to the UK. Cambridge Centre for Natural Material Innovation, I'm sure some of you know, which is a research institution at the University of Cambridge, investigating properties and applications of bio-based materials, such as timber. Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance are another one. And this is a network of cities around the world, including London and Glasgow, working together to mobilize transformative climate action within their jurisdictions. All of these organizations are connected by the Loudest Foundation, and the Built by Nature receives most of our funding from Loudest, and we were founded by them. And our aim really is to stimulate an uptake in demand of timber, mass timber specifically, by supporting the built environment's demand side stakeholders. So what we call the big six that are really key to kind of driving, I suppose, activity in the built environment. And these are developers, they're investors, designers, which includes architects, structural engineers, fire engineers as well, very importantly, I think, for bio-based materials. And then asset owners as well, who are sometimes usually kind of linked to developers. They're usually the kind of same companies. Insurers, which is a big one for timber and other bio-based, and cities as well. So yeah, we call these our big six demand side stakeholders that we focus on, and yeah, these are our core focus. We're supporting them to overcome the challenges that they're facing when seeking to use timber. And we bring some of these together into a pan-European network, as I mentioned. We call this our kind of front-runner network. But yeah, these front-runner organizations, some of whom you can see on screen now, they stand out for three basic reasons, really. One, they have a kind of track record of being involved in timber innovation, so in the kind of transformation of our built environment. Two, just quite simply, they are committed to shifting towards timber. And thirdly, they all have a desire to drive climate solutions together. So they all show kind of keenness to work collaboratively. So why do all of these organizations that I just showed before, these large private developers, want to use wood? And many of these reasons are the same reasons why we might want to use straw, but it's really timber that a lot of them are looking at shifting to. And I think it really comes back to this this big picture. As you're all aware, the construction industry now and for the past few hundred years has been reliant on materials that require vast amounts of energy to produce, mineral-based products, concrete, steel, that need a lot of heat to produce. And our acceleration of the use of those materials has played a big part in the climate crisis that we now face. And cement itself, as you all are aware, I'm sure, constitutes about 8% of our global emissions, both because of the heat that's required to make it, but also because of the carbon that's emitted during the process. An unavoidable part of the chemical reaction when you make cement. So our consumption of these materials continues to drive climate change, and all of the companies that I flashed up on the screen before, even the kind of very largest private developers there, they're all aware of this, and they are really keen to shift towards structural timber products to replace those concrete and steel structures in their developments. So they're low carbon to produce mass timber products, but they're also, as you know, store kind of carbon stores. So they provide us the opportunity to store vast amounts of carbon in our built environment. So I think there is a big movement and momentum behind this, even amongst these kind of large developers, moving away from the idea that cutting down trees and plants generally is bad, but that harvesting them and planting more trees in their place enables us to sequester and store more carbon. And you know, we've been doing this for centuries, and I'm sure you will know that this is one of the kind of oldest timber churches in the world. It's an unassuming little building in Essex, built in the year 845. And much of the timber in this structure internally is original, and the carbon in that church has been stored since 845. So I suppose this is just to say the big picture here, and this is the same reason why I think we need to shift towards using straw, is that we need to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in our buildings for, you know, centuries, millennia, like this building has done. As you know, there are many types of timber product that are used, and all of these products sequester carbon, store carbon. As I mentioned, mass timber is kind of what we're focusing on. So on the left there, you've got 3 different types. SBUK, which is kind of beech laminated veneer lumber, cross laminated timber, and glulam as well. These are predominantly what we're focusing on at the moment. Loads of other like typical wood products there on screen. And if you're not aware, I mean, mass timber is a specific name given to this family of engineered wood products. So really it's just a name for a group of products that comprise multiple pieces of timber layered or laminated together into solid structural elements. And we think they demonstrate the greatest potential to shift the industry at scale, because it's about replacing that concrete and steel in large scale buildings. So just to give a kind of example of the types of buildings that are being built in timber nowadays. So this building is about to complete, a black and white building. It's in Shoreditch. Wolf Thistleton with the architects. The office group, where the clients are there like a bit like a WeWork co-working space, and they have buildings all over London. And so this is one of the latest ones, 7 stories, made out of beech laminated veneer lumber, SBUK, so kind of hardwood LVL, and yeah, it's about to complete. Similarly, this is a building in Mayfair, on Berkeley Square. Elliott Wood with the structural engineers, Piercy & Co, the architects. So it's kind of 9-story office building again, and the floors here are the timber element. The rest of the structure is actually steel. Similarly, this is a kind of hybrid steel and CLT building, being built by Landsec in Southwark in London. 15 stories at its tallest, uses an existing concrete frame. So on that diagram there on the bottom left, you can see there's actually 2 buildings. The one on the left is 4 or 5 stories, I think, of an existing concrete building that's being retained, and they're building a few floors on top of that. And then the building on the right hand side is the kind of newer one, which is designed by Bennett's Associates, the architects, and Hein Tillett Steel are the engineers there. And this is more of a well-known one. It's been completed since 2017, 10-story residential building in Dalston, designed by Ward Thistleton again. So that's the kind of scale of building we've been looking at anyway. So despite the progress that we're seemingly making, timber construction comes with a distinct set of challenges, and building with wood is unlike building with concrete or steel. You can't just replace out the concrete and steel with timber. You need to take a completely different approach. And yeah, so these timber buildings need to be approached in a different way. And in the 5 years since the tragedy at Grenfell, some of these challenges have become more and more acute, and developers have been reporting the need to kind of switch away from timber at a really late design stage. So that kind of context led to the formation of the Timber Accelerator Hub, which was a research project at the ASBP that I was appointed by the ASBP to lead last year. And we were funded by the Loudest Foundation to look specifically at the major challenges, two major challenges that are facing mass timber projects: insurance on the one hand, and fire. So the aims of the Timber Accelerator Hub were to investigate these primary challenges. You can see in that kind of graph at the bottom there, this was a survey of some of the largest developers that Gardner and Theobald did a couple of years ago now, but I think the findings, as far as I can see, remain almost exactly the same. Insurance is the #1 barrier, followed by kind of challenges around fire performance or demonstrating fire performance. There are, of course, other challenges such as cost, competency in education and things like that, but they don't seem to be holding up projects in the same way as these two. So the aims of the Timber Accelerator Hub were to investigate those two specifically, then to establish a network of stakeholders that are seeking to address them from the same stakeholder groups I mentioned earlier, and then to identify, initiate or support further pieces of work that were needed to overcome these major barriers, and make recommendations towards their resolution. So starting, I suppose, with the fire challenge, or the regulatory fire challenge, as we kind of found it to be, because I think this is really the basis of the problems in the insurance sector, was a series of prohibitive regulations and standards for residential construction that have come out in the last 4 years, beginning in 2018 with the building regulations amendment, which is commonly called the combustible materials ban, which precluded the use of any combustible material in the external wall of residential buildings above 18 meters. So any residential building with a floor above 18 meters, as I'm sure you all know about. But this has bled, I suppose, or yeah, kind of seeped out into a cascading series of different standards that have eaten away at the area that you can use timber. So second in 2020 was the GLA, Greater London Authority Affordable Homes Programme funding guidance, which, you know, they said, forget 18 meters, anywhere above ground level, if you want to seek funding from this program, the Affordable Homes Programme, you can't use combustible materials in the external wall of any residential buildings from ground up. So it brought that threshold down to ground. And then in 2021, last year, there was a draft British standard 9991, which was released and then put out for public consultation, and then swiftly taken offline whilst they figure out what to do. But within it, they included this line that said, no combustible materials for any internal or external structural element above the height of 18 meters. So it kind of brought the ban inside. And important to note, this is only single stair residential buildings. So if you provide 2 stairs, this wouldn't apply. But anyway, this draft hasn't been put in place yet, but it was floated, and it was enough to put a couple of developers off. So these 3 bits of regulation and policy together have kind of sent this message out that timber is unsafe, and the shockwaves from these have led into the insurance sector. Despite, you know, the fact that this year we've had a clarification from government that residential buildings up to 18 meters in height, structural timber is allowed, and there was this ongoing consultation that they were thinking about reducing that threshold to 11 meters, but they're not going to do that, and they clarified that this year. And in addition to that, we also know that there's an enormous amount of understanding actually and research that's gone into timber, mass timber, and how it performs in a fire. So we understand quite well actually how fires perform in these buildings. We know a lot about delamination, which is when layers of lamellas of timber kind of fall off. It happens at a fairly predictable rate, and we know quite a lot about charring and how quickly charring layers build up and that kind of thing. There are many things you can do, such as compartmentation, encapsulation of the timber, controlling ventilation, providing sprinklers. There are loads of things that you can do to mitigate fires in mass timber buildings, and this is why across the world they're being built. That it's being used in larger and larger buildings. In addition to this, we also have some quite large-scale fire testing programs going on at the moment. So the Structural Timber Association have a special interest group on CLT, and they're looking at they're doing some quite this kind of £1 million program of fire testing in CLT compartments. So just to say, we know a hell of a lot, but despite this, the wider industry impacts of these prohibitive regulations have been quite significant. There's a heightened awareness of risks, and more and more people are asking for kind of large-scale fire tests, and despite this, testing capacity is pretty limited. So lots of developers have been struggling with this challenge of demonstrating fire performance, even before taking into account insurance. But as I mentioned, insurance has been the kind of primary barrier. So we spent a lot of our time at the ASBP and the Timber Accelerator Hub looking into why exactly that was, what's going on. And it comes down to these two types of insurance really that are the main barriers: construction and property insurance. So construction insurance is insurance of the project as it's on site, and property insurance, we're referring to insurance of the completed building. Property insurance is harder to come by for timber buildings. Construction insurance is less of a challenge, but still is. And we asked our contacts in the insurance sector why exactly mass timber was seen as a risk, and really we learned that it's actually connected to a much longer story that hasn't got anything to do with timber at all, but is actually just about the insurance market and the way that it fluctuates. So what we learned was that in 2008, after the financial crash, loads of capital flooded into the insurance market as a kind of safe place for investment. This led to an increase in capacity, as in insurers had more capacity to insure everything from buildings to whatever, and that meant there was more competition, which led to a kind of race to the bottom in terms of what people would cover. There was a lot of capacity, and so insurers essentially became less risk averse. It was easier to get insurance, and this was what's known as a kind of soft market. This in turn led to a huge spike in claims about 5 years ago, just regardless of Grenfell. This is just due to poor practice and poor due diligence being put in place within the construction sector. And this started to hurt insurers around 2018. And a lot of them withdrew capacity because they were losing a lot of money in construction in order to return their underwriting books to profit. And that leads to a more challenging situation where the insurance sector generally puts their rates up. They restrict their policy coverage, and they they tend to remove cover for what they think are more volatile or challenging risks. And this is known as a hard market, which is kind of where we are now still. We remain in the middle of this hard market cycle and may do so for years to come. And unfortunately, mass timber and timber generally is seen as a risk by insurance providers. And this is really due to a lack of understanding, I think. They haven't had to know so much about the details of new and innovative products like this until now. And as large developers are looking to use it on £200 million projects, alarm bells go off in the offices of the insurers. And it comes down to a lack of data, really. I think they don't have a lot of performance data specific to mass timber buildings. And by performance data, what I mean is kind of claims versus premiums. And that's the data that's important to insurers, because that's how they set their kind of premium levels and price their insurance. So in the absence of an ability to accurately assess what they call probable maximum loss, they assume a total property loss in the event of a fire or a kind of escape of water event. And it's important to mention water, actually, because actually most claims that insurers see are to do with escape of water. So leaks, basically. So they're as worried about leaks as they are about fire when it comes to timber, because it's, how wood performs when it's wet or when it's overly moist is equally worrying to them as how wood performs when it's burnt. So they price for total property loss, which obviously in the case of a kind of £200 million CLT office building is huge. It's, premium rates are kind of 800% of what they would be for non-timber buildings, and they have a very poor perception of timber generally. If you want to learn more about exactly what they think about mass timber, there's a really good white paper that was released by the FPA, Fire Protection Association, and the Risk Authority earlier this year in February. And it sets out exactly what they think of mass timber. And it's probably worth reading that, because it would be more or less similar for other types of timber and bio-based materials. Very important to say that insurance is actually available, but it's just very, very expensive. And it's kind of too high a price for the developers, really. And it really depends on how well the proposal mitigates the risks. And it's with both moisture and fire, it's perfectly possible to mitigate risk in timber buildings in an adequate way. But yes, it's what the insurers are seeing is that it's not being done in a consistent way. So projects are coming to them that look completely different from the last one. And, there's no kind of general standards for how to build a timber building at scale. So the Timber Accelerator Hub identified a few recommendations for what needed to happen to unlock wider use of mass timber and to unlock these two major challenges. And there were 6 of these. The first is just more large-scale fire testing, which is being carried out a little bit, but it seems that there are lots of outstanding research questions and unknowns that need to be answered and can only be answered through large-scale fire testing. Secondly is for the industry to establish common approaches to risk mitigation. So this is just like best practice design standards, really. How do you mitigate risk in a timber building? Thirdly is to kind of scale up engagement with the insurance industry. I was in a meeting earlier today where an insurance broker said, really what's happened is just a breakdown of trust. Like, the insurance industry does not trust the construction industry. And what we need to do to rebuild that trust is to bring the two sectors much closer together. So direct engagement is really, really important. Fourth is consistency between policies and standards. So as I mentioned earlier, these 3 different prohibitive regulations all differ from each other in what they're saying is safe or unsafe, which is sending a general message that timber's unsafe. So we need to get to a point where, you know, if we do have prohibitive standards, at least they all need to be the same height threshold and, you know, saying exactly the same thing. Fifth is dedicated common design standards for timber. So other countries have more kind of like building codes around what good looks like for a timber building, whereas we don't really have that here. So we have a bit of a piecemeal approach that the industry is taking. And sixth is to establish forms of alternative risk transfer. So this is kind of like alternative methods of getting insurance, basically. So as an example, there's a group of private developers who are banding together at the moment and investigating whether they can form their own insurance company, like a captive for timber buildings. As to whether they will be able to do that, that's another question, remains to be seen, but they're investigating it at the moment. They've undertaken a study. And if you can, effectively what a captive is like a group of organizations that are finding it difficult to get insurance for something, banding together, pooling their premiums, and effectively self-insuring each other. So architects did this about 40 years ago. They formed a captive called the REN Association because they were finding it difficult to get PI insurance through the traditional insurance market. So about 40 of the largest practices formed the REN, and it's still going today as a place that architects can go to get PI. Some of these things are now being worked on in solutions that are either funded by Built by Nature or just self-led by the industry. So the new model building is one of the key ones that's kind of completing soon. It's going to be published soon. So Worth has sort of drawn up a set of design principles for a 6-story residential building, and they've got that pre-reviewed by a national warranty provider. So effectively, it's like creating this common design standard by engaging with a warranty provider and getting them to sign off details that could be used by the rest of the industry. A similar thing we're trying to get off the ground at the moment is commercial timber buildings rulebooks. So whereas the new model building was looking at residential, this would be looking at office buildings, commercial buildings. So again, like developing a common standard that the industry can use. The ASBP is working on a mass timber insurance playbook, which is a step-by-step guide on for developers and designers and insurers as well, I think, on what needs to be done to gain insurance for mass timber buildings. DRMM are working on a kind of whole life carbon study for us as well, and quality of life is being brought into that as well. So it's a bit different to the topic of this talk, but it's another grant funded thing by Built by Nature, looking at post-occupancy evaluation and whole life carbon assessments. And finally, just to say that we're, as I mentioned, we're looking at accelerating the use of timber across Europe. So it's not just the UK, and we're funding various projects around Europe to do with either policies or perceptions of timber, research into myths and things like that. So yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. I hope that was relevant. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of the lessons that we've learned from looking at timber will be applicable to all bio-based materials. We've just been looking at a specific type of timber project for a specific type of client as well, kind of large private developers. Yeah, I hope that was interesting.
Wonderful. That was absolutely brilliant. You know what, if you'd have told me 20 years ago, would I be so animated talking about insurance, I'd have laughed in your face. Seriously. But it really is so fascinating to hear all of this, because it's so very relevant and quite pertinent to the straw building community. From what I'm hearing and understanding, and this is my very tiny reflection on what you've just said, you know, this is a niche industry, you know, low carbon natural materials, and the insurance sector regards it, or doesn't regard it as highly as we ought to, especially when we're looking about, you know, turning around very big aspects in the construction sector. So what I'm going to do is to ask those of you who would like to ask questions, please put your hands up, because I'm sure there are a gazillion. I've got some questions to ask you, but I really want to give it over to others. And hello, Tabitha, lovely for you to have joined. And Simon too. Congratulations and well done for all the hard work you're doing with ASPP. Questions? Hello, Lee. Sorry. You're going to do your rhyming. I see your own board behind you. Right, we have Debbie. Debbie, please unmute your mic if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi. Why aren't we just following? You said that the UK is developing its own model for timber buildings. Why don't we just copy what they do in Europe?
Yeah, it's good point. I mean, I think the main reason is that regulations and standards and policies are different from country to country. So so whilst there are details that are kind of commonly used in Austria and Switzerland and Germany that have been fire tested, if you try and then use them here, building control authorities and approvers just don't accept them, basically. So I think the standards need to differ slightly from country to country because we have different regulations and standards and policies.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Andy, I'm going to put you on the spot as an engineer. Is there anything you'd like to ask Joe or John Butler for that matter?
Well, thanks, Joe. That was really good, really interesting to pull all that information together. Something just kind of occurred to me, really. It's just from this is the straw bale kind of cell in a way, because straw actually sequesters carbon much better than timber does in reality. So for various reasons, and timber can be quite carbon high, and so it's good to sort of just remind ourselves of that as well, to try and get straw into buildings, whether it be in a modern methods of construction way, and sometimes not to, as an engineer, not to always throw out the baby with the bathwater. Sometimes a steel beam has better carbon calculation than a glulam one does, because of what it's doing. So sometimes embracing all materials and really calculating every project, I think, is really, really worthwhile doing, because sometimes the answers are not what you think they are, and there might be tricks in that to get it through insurance. For example, you could say, well, it's a steel frame project, but we're going to, because I quite often do this, I might use the odd steel beam, but then I put a load of timber in there, and no one minds because there was a little bit of steel in there in the first place. So there could be tricks like that to kind of get wood used a bit more, but also to always criticize how, or critique how we use that wood, because it's a very precious material, and every tree we cut down, you know, affects the soil and all those sorts of things. So it's just looking at it holistically. But yeah, thank you very much. I really thought that was very useful. All the information on the insurance as well, and the history of it.
Oh, thanks. And yeah, no, you're totally right to point out that, yeah, hybrid buildings, for want of a better word, is kind of more attractive to the insurance sector. That is a good sell for them, using steel in place of just an all timber building. Equally concrete as well. I hate to say it, but they seem to quite like it when you retain some of your structure in concrete. So ground floor in concrete will help reduce your insurance premiums, and the core as well if you're building a kind of quite tall building. So yeah, whilst that's as a kind of climate activist, I'm just thinking that that's not good enough. But if it's what we can get, then maybe, yeah.
Going to do the maths, you know, if the concrete is carbon neutral, then it's fine, isn't it? I'm still not saying we should. I'm just saying just work it all out, because the answers are sometimes not what we expect them to be.
John,
Yeah.
did you want to put forward a question? You're scratching your head. I'm just wondering if your brain is working overtime.
I've just had an itchy head.
So, I mean,
guess-
go on.
I guess there's someone with a hand up, but I was just kind of wondering if you have any thoughts, Joe, on sort of what lessons might be for us, particularly in the straw bale world, of how to sway insurers, or what information is best used to kind of what information we might need to gather that we maybe haven't already to help with the insurance side of things. You might
I mean,
not
I
have
think
any specific thoughts on that, but if you do,
I think one thing would be kind of moving towards standardization, because I think insurers quite like it when the same thing is brought to them, proposed to them time and time again. And another thing would just be undertaking as much testing as the industry can afford. And, you know, if you've moved towards a standardized system, then that becomes easier to pool your resources, right? Because you can test things together. But another thing, what I was chatting to Cyprian about recently was maybe just trying to begin to pool data on straw bale build or straw buildings generally, in terms of, you know, premium rates, what they've been, and claims is the important thing. Like how big have insurance claims been on straw buildings? And if you can begin to build a resource over time, a data resource, then it perhaps will give you quite a strong hand to say, oh, well, actually, look, straw bale buildings have performed really well. Haven't been many claims on these. They've been a good risk to insure for you as insurers. So if you can make that case, if you can take them the data, then I think that would be quite strong.
It's a great idea, and has the advantage of being infinitely doable in terms of a research project, frankly.
Absolutely.
With potentially somewhat low budget from our end of things. I think we can
it kind of
that sort of data, and it sounds like it'd be really useful. I'd be interested to see that.
I think it segues quite neatly into the work that School of Natural Building had undertaken with regards to the Upstraw project, which was to collect the data of buildings that were built within the UK. And if you were to go onto, and I'm not downplaying School of Natural Building's work at all, if you were to go onto the site on the European Straw Bale Association site and look at the difference between the UK and France and basically the rest of Europe, according to that map, it looks as if we've hardly built anything. So I think that kind of work really needs to be done. So we go out and collect that data and pick it up and push it and funnel it into this particular task. I'm mindful of the time. I just want to ask Callum, who has his hand up, has been waiting patiently. Did you want to ask a question, Callum?
Yes, I just wanted to firstly thank you very much. It's a huge amount of expertise and really, really positive knowledge and inspiring. Yeah, really wonderful. So thank you for organising and thank you for presenting and doing all this hard work. Just quickly around regulations, do you see those in the research that you did with the Acceleration Hub? Do you see those shifting anytime soon? It was really encouraging to hear that actually we shouldn't be fully dissuaded by the insurance landscape, but in terms of regulations, do you think that the standardization and the testing is going to actually persuade any policy shift? Because that seems to be the biggest issue for our community land trust.
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. So the government now has got this ongoing policy working group called the Timber and Construction Policy Working Group, which is being led by DEFRA and has the involvement of BAYS and DLUC as well. So all the kind of important kind of departments, I think, for this, and they're acting on this promise in the net zero strategy. Their big strategy that they released before COP last year, where they said they kind of pledged to increase the use of timber in construction. So yeah, so they are now looking at what policy they need to introduce to do that. So it feels like there's a bit of, at least a little bit of government momentum. I think this year it was actually quite a big bit of progress that we finally got an answer on the public consultation on lowering the threshold of the combustible materials ban to 11 meters. Finally, we got an answer that said they're not going to do that for structural timber, and they clarified exactly what they were going to ban. And it's still not ideal because it's kind of combustible filler and insulation materials between 11 and 18 meters, I think. But at least it's a little bit of clarity. And then on the other kind of authorities, the Greater London Authority, we're trying to speak to them at the moment, and there's no hope of getting them to overturn that bit of funding guidance between now and 2025, which is when it's up for review. But the next funding round, 2026 to 2030 or 2031, I'm hopeful that we can get them to remove that prohibitive regulation from there, and hopefully then we can unlock residential low-rise construction that uses bio-based materials in the external wall in London again. But yeah, I don't know, I think it's quite a long game with the policies and regulations. We've got ourselves into a situation where, yeah, it's a bit of a complex web of prohibitive policies, and we need to work like in a quite focused way, I think, just engaging with those authorities. So it's the GLA, it's the government that sets the building regulations, and the British Standards Institute. We need to make the case to them about why bio-based materials are safe, and provide them with evidence. It's really evidence that they need. So yeah, I think we'll get there, but yeah, a lot of work.
Thank you, Joe. That was a really good answer, actually. I've got one question I'd like to, actually I've got a million questions I want to ask you, but I'm going to ask just one, because I think that because if we're looking at the construction sector at present, and the biggest theme, if you like, that seems to be going around at the moment is regarding retrofit. Yes, everybody suddenly, wants to retrofit this, retrofit that. And this particular question, I think, chimes in with what Andy Bayliss just or referred to earlier, which is that if you're using steel, and I'm not wishing or wanting to do so, but steel and concrete in this particular instance, if we're using it with straw, effectively what you're talking about, because I think you gave an example, was the timber square in your slides earlier. Effectively what you're talking about is retrofit, really, isn't it? So it's possible, it is possible to fuse the two and to work with it in harmony, so that the insurance sector understand it, and other respective boards or groups, administrative groups like local authority planning can really understand it. Oh, concrete, yes, we get that. Straw, no. But I think I get it in that regard, but maybe this is the way we will have to go to get things done in that regard.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of the projects that we're seeing CLT now being used on are actually vertical extensions of existing buildings in London. So like an additional 2 floors on top of a concrete frame,
Yeah.
Which is a lot more palatable, right? Like it's an 8-story concrete building that exists already, and we're just adding a few floors of timber on. And as we retain more and more existing buildings, I think that's a lot of the type of project that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yeah, I think it just leaves for me to say thank you very much, Joe, for giving up your evening. I know you've had a very, very busy day today. I know you've been very busy, generally speaking, so to have you here tonight is we're very much appreciative of your time that you've given up. Thank you everyone for turning up tonight. This will be shared on YouTube as a later stage. So I just want to say thank you and good night.
Thanks so much, Cyprian. It's been a pleasure to come and good to meet you all. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.